Do you remember the first time you were in love? Because I remember. I remember the first time I felt those feelings of love for somebody, that first crush I had. I didn't know what love really was until I met this girl that I met. And I've loved things, but like when I met her, it was like everything changed. My whole life changed. Things were different. It was the first time I experienced that deep feeling of being in love with somebody. And this girl, she came from like a fairly weird household. She had two sisters. She was the middle child. She had two sisters. She had a dad, but her mom tragically passed away. And so she lived with her dad, her two sisters, and her dad's two friends that also lived there that she called uncle, but they weren't really uncles, I don't think. But it was a weird situation, but you know what? It made her who she was, and that's why I loved her. She was witty. She's sarcastic. She's a little bit of a tomboy. She was constantly spying on her older sister. And she would even, there was this saying that she had that every time she said it melted my heart. Anytime someone was mean to her, she would say, "How rude." I was like, every time it's like, oh, it just melted my heart. And this person, the first person I fell in love with, was a person named Stephanie Tanner from Full House. When I saw her, my life changed. It was like, oh, this is what love is. Right here, Stephanie Tanner. So I was in love for her. For years, about 8 seasons, I was in love with Stephanie Tanner. But then something happened around 1995 that kind of changed everything, and my heart didn't know what to decide because I was in love with Stephanie, but then this new girl showed up in my life. And I remember being like, ooh, look at her. In 1995, I started to I was debating, because there was Stephanie and she was awesome, but this new girl was this awesome girl who was a vegetarian hippie. That's how she started, at least. She eventually grew out of that. But I didn't hold that against her at all. She was academically successful. She understood that she was beautiful, but her real beauty was inside. She understood that. She was super popular. And this girl was a girl that goes by the name of Topanga Lawrence from Boy Meets World. I remember seeing both of them. I was like, I don't know which one to pick. These both are awesome. It was the first time I felt love. I remember as a kid, when I saw them, I was like, ooh, these are weird feelings I've never felt before about somebody. Love. Love is weird because the word love can be used in so many different ways. You can say things like, I can say things like, I love my wife. And the love I have for my wife is different than the love I have for my kids, which is different than the love I have for my family, which is different from the love I have for my friends, which is different from the love I have for the Ravens and the Orioles. And Orioles is a love that never returns anything back. I also love comic books. It's different. That word love changes. I also love pizza and wings and Mexican food. So the word love is used to talk about who I'm in love with, my wife, and to talk about tacos the same way, right? Love, the word love can be used in so many different ways. So when Jesus calls us to love, what kind of love is he talking about? The same way I love tacos? Is that the kind of love he's talking about? What is that love? Because Jesus, when he was asked what is the greatest commandment, he told us what it was. In Mark chapter 12, verse 30, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your mind and all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Jesus tells us that everything we do should hinge on those two commandments. Love God and love other people, that we should love. Love God, love other. But what does that word love actually mean? Jesus was quoting from the Old Testament, which is written in Hebrew. And the word love that was written originally in Hebrew is a word called ahava. And then Jesus spoke in Aramaic, which was kind of like a cousin to Hebrew. So when he said the word love, he used the word rakma. And then his disciples and his followers who wrote the New Testament, when they were writing it down, they were actually writing it in Greek. So when they wrote this part in Mark chapter 12, verse 30 and 31, when they said the word love, they wrote a word called agape. Agape. What does that mean? The followers of Jesus who wrote this word used this word agape to talk about love. But they didn't just say agape because that's what Jesus said. That isn't the way they defined agape. They defined it by the way Jesus acted, about what Jesus did, how he lived life. It wasn't just what he said, it was actually what he did. And they redefined what the word love meant with this word agape. So when they asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He quoted Deuteronomy 6, which says, love the Lord your God with all your mind, soul, heart, and strength. And then he quoted Leviticus 19, which says, love your neighbor as yourself. So they would probably say, okay, but then which one is it, Jesus? And he would say, yes, it's both. In fact, the fact that you're asking the question which one it is means you don't get it. Because you cannot love me and not love everybody else. It's not possible. You can only love me if you love everybody else. And you can't love everybody else unless you love me. It's two sides of the same coin. Love God, love others. It's interlocked. It's connected. See, when Jesus talked about love, he talked about an agape love. It isn't just a feeling that you have. It is something that you did. It wasn't a feeling that I had like I had with Stephanie and Topanga. It was what you actually do with that love. It's the actions that you take. It is so much more than just a feeling. And we know this. We know this. But for some of us, I would say most of us, we struggle with this. And here's why we struggle to actually live out an agape love. Because it's hard for a lot of us to love without an agenda attached to it. It's hard to do. I'm going to love my friends, but I'm expecting they're going to love me back. And if they don't love me back, then I'm not going to love them anymore. I'm going to show my spouse I love them by doing something, but they also need to pull their weight because I'm expecting them to do something in return. It's not just me. This is a partnership. So I'm going to show them I love them by what I do, but they better pull their weight. I expect that. I'm going to show love to strangers as long as I'm comfortable with them, as long as I think they deserve my love, as long as I think that they will use it the right way, as long as they are thankful, as long as they have the right attitude, then I will love them. But I'm going to love them, but they got to meet certain requirements. See, the love that Jesus talks about, this agape love, it doesn't have an agenda. That is why we cannot love with an agenda. In fact, love with no agenda means that love is the agenda. That's what it's about. If we add an agenda to it, it's not love anymore. Love with no agenda means that love is the agenda. That is why we're doing things. That is what we are pursuing, love. The purpose of helping, of serving, of caring for, or befriending anyone is to represent God's heart to them. No strings attached. No agenda attached to it. Love is the ultimate goal. It isn't a stepping stone to get what you want. It isn't a way to manipulate someone for your own selfish gain. We love with no agenda because love is the agenda. The second we love to receive something for personal gain, whether it's to use as ammunition later when you need it, to guilt someone, to get something in return, or to fulfill an insecurity inside of us that we need to be recognized or loved back, whatever it is, the second we do that, we are not practicing the agape love that Jesus told us to do. We're not doing it. Because all of a sudden now we are attaching an agenda to love. Love with no agenda means that love is the agenda. So I was looking through a example in Scripture this week. The best example I could find was a guy named Jonathan. You may know Jonathan. You may not. I'll give you some background on him. Jonathan's dad was a guy named Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel at the time. The first king Israel ever had was a guy named Saul. And Jonathan's was Saul's first oldest son. So Jonathan, being the oldest son, he could safely assume that he would be the next in line to be king. That's how it worked. Whoever the king was, the oldest son was the next one in line. So he could assume that he would be the next one. The problem was God had a different plan. God said, you know what? This Saul guy's not cutting it. Samuel, who was a prophet, said, go find someone else. And they found this little shepherd boy named David. You know who David is. You know the story of David and Goliath. So eventually David kills Goliath. Eventually David starts working for Saul. And now he's working for Saul and he gets to meet Jonathan. Here's what's weird about this for me. Jonathan, who's supposed to be the king, now meets David, who's going to take his job. But yet Jonathan and David got along. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 3 says, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. So think about what's happening here. Let's imagine that you worked for your dad somewhere and they had a family business and you just assume that when your parents retire, they are going to give you the business. But instead, they bring this guy named Fred in. And it's like, hey, Fred's now going to take over the business. Sorry about that. I know it's supposed to be you. I know your grandfather had this business and your great-grandfather had this business, but now it's going to be Fred. How would you feel about Fred? You would probably not be a big fan of Fred, right? To say the least, you would probably not like him. Would you become best friends with him? Definitely not, right? But not Jonathan. Jonathan, even though David was taking his rightful place as king, Jonathan, because his faith was strong enough, because he was so secure in who God called him to be, still loved David, made a covenant with him. He loved him as himself. They became best friends. Sometime later, they eventually, I'm sure, exchanged hearts that were split in half, and then one wore one, the other one you put together and became best friends. They're best friends at this point. They loved each other. Jonathan loved David. Jonathan loves David even when it cost him. Jonathan loves David with no agenda. And then eventually what happens, what's more incredible is that Jonathan's love for David, even though he loves him so much, Saul, Jonathan's dad, doesn't want David to be king. So Saul is trying to figure out a way to kill David so that Jonathan can be king. Jonathan deserved to be king, but Saul wants him to be king, but Saul's like, you know what, I'm going to take care of David, and I'm going to do something about it. But Jonathan didn't want it to happen. Chapter 19, verse 1. Saul told his son, Jonathan, and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. Jonathan, this is your chance. All you have to do is nothing. You could have just sat back and said, I'm not doing anything. I'm not saying anything. Whatever happens, what happens. And Saul would have taken care of David, and you could have been king. That's all you had to do was nothing. But not Jonathan, because he loves David. He loves David with no agenda attached to it. So Jonathan talks to his dad and says this, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. And he's talking about, remember that big giant that no one could kill, and David did that? Remember that? That benefited you greatly. Remember that? He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Jonathan could have said anything. Jonathan could have used this opportunity to get something out of David. Could have used this opportunity to leverage it so that he can become king one day. But Jonathan loved David without an agenda. He reminded his dad about everything that David had done. He spoke well of David. In fact, he convinced his dad not to kill David. At least he thought. Saul talks to Jonathan, his son, and goes, yeah, okay, I won't kill him. And then sometime later he goes, I'm going to kill him anyways. I'm going to take care of it. David finds out about it. So David talks to Jonathan and says, hey, no, he's going to kill me. And Jonathan's like, no. He told me he would not kill you. So they make a plan. They figure something out. Here's what happens in chapter 20, verse 4. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. Listen, my dad told me he's not going to kill you. But if you says you think he will, whatever you say, I'm going to do it. Why? He loves without an agenda. So they make a plan, and Jonathan goes to dinner with his dad, and he's getting the vibe from his dad, trying to see, okay, I want to bring up David and just see kind of how he responds and see what he's going to do. And he brings up David, and before he finds out the news that David already told him that Saul wants to kill David. So how does Jonathan respond in verse 17? And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath of love for him because he loved him so much. So that at the dinner, they have this oath. They find out that what David said was true. And here's what happens. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. He finds out what David said was true, that Saul is going to kill David, and he's grieved by it. Did you notice that word, grieved? Jonathan's love for David caused him to grieve over potential pain for David. It broke his heart because he had a love for David, a love with no agenda. See, most of us, we know David. He's the king after God's own heart. He killed Goliath. We know David. We tell stories about David. We tell our kids about David. But behind every David is a Jonathan who loved him with no agenda. Without Jonathan's help, David doesn't survive. Without Jonathan's help, David doesn't become king. Without Jonathan's help, David does not become the greatest king of Israel. See, we all want to be David. David's visible. He's successful. He becomes king one day. He's popular. He's glamorous. He's rich. He's powerful. He gets all the fame and all the glory. We all want to be David because we want all that. But here's what I've learned. We aren't called to be David. We're called to be Jonathan. See, Jesus is the David. He is the better David. He is the one who gets all the glory, all the fame, all the power. We are called to be Jonathan. We are called to love without an agenda, to practice agape love. We are called to love that way. We are called to love God through the way that we love our neighbors. We are called to love our neighbors because we understand the love that God has for us. We are not David. We're Jonathan. We are called to love without an agenda. So how do we practice loving without an agenda? How do we practice this? How do we work on this? And I think the more important question is to understand, how do we know when we are loving with an agenda? What are the warning signs to tell us, hey, right now the love I have has an agenda attached to it? I'm going to give you 3 ways. You can write these down on your impact cards if you want. 3 ways that we know that we are loving with an agenda. The first one is this: you need credit. You need credit. Since I was a kid, I always wanted credit for good things I did. Always. I always wanted the credit. Whenever I would do the laundry, the one time I did as a kid, whenever I would do it, I wanted my mom to know, hey, Mom, I don't know if you noticed, but laundry's done. Or the dishes, the 3 times I did that as a kid, I was like, hey, Mom, don't worry about dishes tonight. I took care of it. Your favorite son, right? And you go, yeah, of course. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So I always wanted credit. Every time I did something good, I always wanted credit when I was a kid. When I eventually moved in with roommates, I moved in with 5 other guys in this disgusting, dirty house, because 6 guys lived there, and none of them liked to keep anything clean. And we did not have a dishwasher, so those dishes were just pile. And every once in a while, I would do the dishes, and you better believe, when I did those dishes, all of my roommates knew, hey, just so you guys know, doing the dishes, sorry, I can't hang out right now. I'm too busy doing these dishes. I want people to know. I wanted credit for it. Even to this day, I struggle with not telling my wife things that I've done to get credit for it. Because there's a lot of times I'll do stuff and I kind of want her to notice, and so I'll just I don't want to say it, so I'll just kind of kick it or whatever. I'll do dishes. Oh wait, there happens to be no dishes in here. I'm sorry. I still struggle with that today, because all of us want credit at times. Whenever you need credit, there's an agenda attached to it. When you seek credit for loving someone with an action, then you are loving them with an agenda. You are getting something in return. You're getting credit. And when you seek something in return for your love, you aren't actually loving selflessly. You've probably seen this, but I've seen pictures of celebrities and politicians who are serving the community. And at first I'm always like, oh, that's nice that they're part of a charity, or they're helping at a food pantry, or they're just serving their community. That's awesome. That's a great way of serving the community. And then my next question is, who took the picture? Or who brought the camera? Who brought the photographer? And if you ever learn of any celebrity or any politician making a photo op of serving, immediately you go, I don't trust that guy. I don't trust her. No way. If you're making it about credit, all of a sudden I want nothing to do with you. We already understand that. We make something a photo op. When you need credit for something, you're loving with an agenda. All of a sudden now you want something in return. You want credit. You want recognition. We're not called to do that. Agape love says we love without an agenda, because love is the agenda. The second we need credit for something, we're starting to love with an agenda, number 1. Number 2, you have expectations. This one's hard. Expectations are a belief that something will happen or it will be the case in the future. Expectations aren't necessarily bad. Expectations or expecting someone in regards to trust is a good thing. If you tell me or agree to do something and I expect you to do it, that's me trusting you. I expect that my wife's going to be faithful just like she expects I'm going to be faithful, because we trust each other. I expect staff, if they say they're going to do something, I expect they're actually going to do it because I trust them. So expectations is not a bad thing in regards to trust. But when we take expectations and put it with love, it attaches an agenda to it. Because what if we loved other people without expecting anything in return? No expectations. We don't need anything back. If we started to do that, we would be following the example Jesus gave us. Because that's exactly what Jesus did, and that's exactly what Jesus called us to do. Jesus calls us to seek other people and to see other people's well-being without expecting anything in return, especially showing love to people that cannot return it. People that are down and out, that cannot return it in any way, to give them love without expecting anything in return. This is what God does for us. See, we can never return the love that he has given us, but he gave it anyways. In fact, he died for the chance that you would turn to him. We can never return it. He expects nothing from us but just to give our life to him, because that is the best way for us to live. So what if we started looking at people and loving people without expecting anything in return? What if we loved our spouse with our actions without expecting them to return it? Like maybe we just did the dishes without expecting them to say thank you or needing to do anything else in return. We just do the laundry. We just do whatever it takes to show them that we love them without expecting anything back. You don't need to do anything on your end. I've got it. What if we started doing that? What if we loved our community without trying to get any fame out of it? What if we just served our community and they didn't even know we were doing it? What if we did a food pantry at another church and we didn't even tell them it was us doing it? What if we did that? What if we did that without getting anything, expecting anything in return? What if we loved our coworkers without expecting it to result in a raise or expecting them to return the favor at some point in the future? When expectations are added to love, all of a sudden we are loving with an agenda. Love without an agenda means that love is the agenda. And the last one, number 3, you don't see everyone as valuable. When we get to this point, or we don't see everyone as valuable, as important, when we get to that point, then all of a sudden we are attaching an agenda to love. The ultimate sign of authentic love, of love without an agenda, is how you treat the person that you cannot stand, is how you treat the person that you completely disagree with, is how you treat the person that you don't necessarily like, that you can't get along with, how you treat that person. Because anyone can treat people that you like friendly. Anyone can do that. But what about the people that are complete opposite of you? That's why Jesus says you need to love your enemy as yourself. Luke 6:35 says, "But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting anything back." Do they only deserve your love? Do they only deserve your love when you agree with them? Or do they deserve your love at all times? Do they only deserve your love when they can benefit you? Or do they always deserve your love? Jesus constantly showed this. Jesus would always move towards the poor and towards the sick and towards the ones that were down and out, towards the ones that could not benefit him in any way. He always moved towards those people. The ones that usually fell through the cracks in their society, that's the people that Jesus went to. That's the people that he went to. And the people that were considered the most valuable at Jesus' times, the most important, he would storm into the temple and call them a bunch of hypocrites and snakes. That's what Jesus did. He made himself an enemy to them because he just completely told them exactly who they were. And instead of attacking them to overthrow them, which is what they thought the Messiah would look like, the Messiah that the Jewish culture thought it would be someone that eventually became king and overthrown things. Instead of overthrowing his enemies or the people that he disagreed with the most, instead of doing that, you know what he did? He allowed them to attack, he allowed them to persecute, and he allowed them to crucify him. That's how Jesus acted. He died for the corruption and the hypocrisy of his enemies. You know why he did that? Because he loved them with an agape love, a love without an agenda. That's why John says it this way. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Love without an agenda. That means that love is the agenda. We need to love our community simply because we love them. No matter what happens, no matter what we get in return. We need to love our friends simply because we love them. And when we do, we demonstrate how we see them. We demonstrate the value that we see in them because we do it selflessly, expecting nothing in return. We need to love our family, not to guilt them into doing things for us, but simply because we love them. God commands us to love. And he says to us, you love me? Prove it by loving everybody else. Love with no agenda means that love is the agenda. Love is the goal. And I believe that all of us want to do this. I believe that all of us want to love. I believe that there are people in our lives that we want to show that love to. And sometimes the best way to show that love to people is by telling them about a God who loves them. It's about telling them about a God who's there for them, the love of God. And I know a lot of you, I've heard emails, I've gotten texts from people, and I've had people ask me, hey, I want to tell my family, I want to tell my friends, I want to tell people about this God that has shown so much love to me. I want to tell them about it. What do I do? How do I go about doing that? So if that's you and you have those people in your life that you want to show that love to, I'll give you really quick 5 quick ways you can do that. 1, listen to their story. Whatever it is, listen to that story that they have. 2, find common ground. Whatever common ground you can find with them, find it. 3, look for an opportunity. When that opportunity comes, you can talk to them about God, look for it. 4, tell them the gospel. Tell them about the God who loves them. And then 5, throw this list away. That is an agenda. That's an agenda. Throw all of that out. We like to make it a formula because it's easier. That's not how love works. You can't make it a formula. You can't have an end goal in mind. You simply love. And if you have the opportunity and the privilege to talk to them about Jesus, then great. But you should be talking to them about Jesus by the way you love them and by the way you act around them. And when that opportunity comes up, then tell them about it. And maybe they'll go to church one day. Maybe it'll be this church. Maybe it'll be a different church. Maybe they will know God someday. But the end goal, you have to remember, is God saves them, not you. See, we like to make something an agenda and a formula because it's so much easier, and then we can really figure it out. Even when we are talking about a sermon about love without an agenda, we start doing it again. That's how easy it is. That's how hard it is for us to not attach an agenda to it. So I want to remind you to check your heart when it comes to how you love people. Because God tells us to simply love. Love. Do I want people to meet Jesus? Of course I do. But if I love them so that they will meet Jesus, I'm not actually loving them. I love my kids, but I love my kids, and because I love my kids, I want them to do well in life. But I don't love my kids so they will do well in life. And remember, you don't save anyone. So we are called to have this love. I believe that when you focus on love without an agenda, making love the agenda, the people that you have been praying about, the people that you have been praying about for years and years and years, they will start to move a little closer to Jesus. I believe they will. Or they won't. I don't know. Because it's not up to you. You're not in control of it. We are called to love. That's it. Either way, you're living out the command of love, no matter what your family and friends who have their own free will decide to do. Love God. Love others. Love without an agenda. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for being the God who loves us, who truly loves us, who defines what love is. And thank you for being the God that sent your Son for us so we can have a relationship with you. Dear God, it's hard for all of us to love just to love. But we know that's what you called us to do. We know that that is what you have called us to represent. Dear God, I just pray right now that you help us, help our hearts to change to loving you and loving others without expecting anything in return, without needing any credit at all, understanding that everyone is valuable because they are a son and daughter of yours. And help us to represent you by the way we love our family, our friends, our community, our neighbors, our enemies. Thank you for pouring that agape love on us. Help us to reflect it to the rest of the world that desperately needs it. In your Son's name, amen. Let's sing this closing song together. Let's stand and sing.